I need you to know that I won't be home tonight. Something came up at work, read the text from Doug. I stared at it for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the screen before I typed back okay with a period. No emoji, no question, just acknowledgement. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter of our Traverse City condo and glanced at the half-prepared anniversary dinner I'd been working on for the past 2 hours. 16 years of marriage, and I was still trying. Pan-seared scallops, his favorite. A bottle of that Pinot Noir from the vineyard we'd visited in Leelanau last summer. The good dishes that had been a wedding gift from my grandmother. I wasn't surprised by the text. Disappointed, yes, but not surprised. Doug's something came up at work excuses had become more frequent over the past year. As the managing partner at his accounting firm, he always had a client emergency, a deadline, a meeting that couldn't wait. Tonight was just one more broken promise in a marriage that had been quietly fracturing for years. I wrapped the scallops and put them back in the refrigerator. I corked the wine and changed out of the navy blue dress I'd bought specially for tonight. Then I did what I always did when Doug disappointed me. I pushed down the hurt, told myself I was overreacting, and found something else to do with my evening. This time, I decided to catch up on laundry. Doug had been traveling a lot for client meetings in Grand Rapids, and his suitcase from his most recent trip was still sitting in our bedroom. I unzipped it, sorting his clothes methodically, checking pockets before tossing items into the hamper. That's when I found the receipt. It had been folded and stuffed into the pocket of his gray slacks, the expensive ones he only wore to important meetings. The receipt was from a restaurant called Bistro Bella in Grand Rapids. 2 steaks, 2 glasses of champagne, a chocolate dessert to share. The date was yesterday, when Doug had told me he was at a continuing education seminar. My hands trembled slightly as I smoothed out the crumpled paper. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. There could be an explanation, a client dinner perhaps. But something cold and certain settled in my stomach as I continued unpacking his suitcase. In the side pocket of his toiletry bag, I found a silver earring. It wasn't mine. I sat down slowly on the edge of our bed, the receipt in one hand, the earring in the other. For 16 years, I had been Melissa Parker, the supportive wife who never complained when her husband worked late, who looked the other way when he came home smelling of unfamiliar perfume, who believed him when he said the long blonde hair on his jacket must have been from the waitress at lunch. 16 years of making excuses for him. 16 years of shrinking myself to make room for his ego. 16 years of convincing myself that if I was just a little more understanding, a little more patient, a little more perfect, he would finally see me. I placed the earring and receipt on the nightstand and pulled out my laptop. I knew his passwords. I'd helped him set them up, after all. I logged into his email, his bank account, his cell phone records. With each click, with each piece of evidence I uncovered, the fog I'd been living in began to lift. There were hotel charges in Grand Rapids, in Kalamazoo, even in Petoskey, just an hour from our home. There were late-night calls and texts to numbers I didn't recognize. There were emails with a woman named Cynthia, planning meetups, exchanging intimate messages, discussing how to keep their relationship secret. And then I found the photos. Doug and a blonde woman at a restaurant, holding hands across the table. Doug and the same woman hiking in a state park we used to visit. Doug kissing her on what looked like a hotel balcony. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't break things or call him in a rage. Instead, a strange calm settled over me as the full picture of my marriage came into focus. I had spent 16 years living in denial, making myself smaller to accommodate his lies. I had dimmed my own light so that he could shine brighter. I had given up dreams, friendships, parts of myself, all to preserve a marriage that existed only in my imagination. In that moment, sitting on our bed, surrounded by evidence of his betrayal, I made a decision. I would not let this break me. I would not give him the power to define my worth. And I would not waste one more minute of my life trying to earn the love of someone who had never truly seen me. I closed the laptop and went to take a shower. I let the hot water run over me, washing away years of doubt and insecurity. By the time I stepped out, wrapped in a towel, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I slept in the guest room that night. When Doug came home the next morning around 9, I was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee and reading a novel. I had always loved reading, but somewhere along the way I'd stopped making time for it. Doug's needs had always seemed more pressing than my own small pleasures. "Morning," he said, setting down his overnight bag. He looked surprised to see me there, relaxed and reading, instead of rushing around preparing his breakfast or doing chores. "You're up early for a Saturday." "Actually, I've been up for hours," I said, marking my place in the book. "We need to talk, Doug." "Can it wait? I'm exhausted." The presentation ran late, and then we had technical difficulties with... "It was Bistro Bella, right?" I interrupted, my voice steady. "You had the filet mignon. Cynthia probably had the salmon. She seems like a salmon kind of woman." The color drained from his face. "Mel, what are you talking about?" I smiled slightly. "Please don't insult my intelligence on top of everything else. I found the receipt and the earring and the emails and the photos." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then his expression hardened. "You went through my things? You spied on me? That's what you're going with? I'm the one who did something wrong here?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. 16 years, Doug. 16 years of my life I gave you, and you couldn't even respect me enough to be honest. "It's not what you think," he said, moving toward me. "Cynthia's just a colleague. We work closely together, that's all." "Stop." I held up my hand. "I've spent years believing your lies because I wanted to, because it was easier than facing the truth. I'm not doing that anymore." He sank into the chair across from me, his face a mask of calculated remorse. "Okay, fine. I made a mistake, a stupid mistake. But it didn't mean anything, Mel. You're my wife. I love you." There was a time when those words would have been enough, when I would have grasped at them like a lifeline and used them to justify staying. But now they sounded hollow, like lines from a script he'd rehearsed. "The thing is, Doug, I don't think you do know how to love anyone but yourself," I said quietly. "And that's not entirely your fault. I've enabled it. I've allowed myself to be an afterthought in your life, to accept scraps of attention and convince myself it was a feast." "That's not fair," he protested, his voice rising. "I've given you everything. This house, the vacations, the lifestyle. Things," I cut in. "You've given me things, and you've used them to excuse your absence, your affairs, your complete disregard for my feelings." "So what? You're leaving me because I worked late a few times? Because I had dinner with a colleague?" I shook my head, almost pitying him. "No, Doug. I'm leaving because I finally see clearly what I've been avoiding for years. This marriage isn't a partnership. It's a performance where I'm expected to play the role of the grateful, undemanding wife while you do whatever you want." He leaned forward, his face flushing. "You're overreacting. Let's take some time to calm down and we can..." "I've already contacted a lawyer," I said, and the shock on his face gave me a small, sad satisfaction. "I'm not interested in punishing you, Doug. I just want out." "A lawyer?" His voice cracked. "Jesus, Mel, don't you think that's extreme? We can work this out. I'll go to counseling. I'm staying with my sister in Petoskey for a while," I continued, standing up from the table. "I've packed some things. The lawyer will be in touch about the rest." Panic flashed across his face as he realized I was serious. "You can't just leave. What about the mortgage? Your car payment? How are you going to support yourself?" I smiled, genuinely this time. "I have a master's degree in library science that I've never used because you said it was more important for me to support your career. I have savings that you don't know about. And as of yesterday, I have a job interview at the Petoskey Public Library." "You've been planning this?" he asked, incredulous. "No," I said. "I've been surviving, Doug. Planning would have required me to acknowledge the truth about our marriage, and until yesterday, I wasn't ready to do that. But I am now." He stood up so quickly that his chair toppled backward. "You'll never make it without me. You think being a librarian in some small town is going to make you happy? You think you can just throw away everything we've built?" "What we've built," I repeated, considering the words. "That's an interesting way to phrase it. What exactly have we built, Doug? A home where I'm alone most nights? A relationship where I have to check your phone to know where you've been? A life where I've lost sight of who I am because I've been so focused on being who you want me to be?" He had no answer for that. We stood in silence for a moment, the truth hanging between us like a physical thing. I don't hate you, I said finally. I don't even want revenge. I just want to remember what it feels like to value myself. And I can't do that with you. I walked past him, picked up my suitcase from where I'd left it by the door, and headed out. He followed me, still talking, still trying to regain control of the situation. You'll be back, he called as I put my suitcase in the trunk of my car. When you realize how good you had it, you'll be begging to come home. I paused, my hand on the car door. That's the thing, Doug. This was never really my home. It was always just the place where I lived to make your life easier. The drive to Petoskey took just under an hour. My sister Jen was waiting on her porch when I pulled up, 2 glasses of wine already poured. She didn't ask questions when I called her the night before. She just said, "It's about damn time," and told me her guest room was made up. As we sat on her porch overlooking Little Traverse Bay, I told her everything. The years of suspicion, the evidence I'd found, the strange calm I'd felt when I finally confronted the truth. "I'm proud of you," she said, raising her glass, "to my sister, who's finally putting herself first." I clinked my glass against hers. "I should have done it years ago." "But you didn't," she said simply. "And now you are. That's what matters." That night, I lay awake in Jen's guest room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the waves lapping against the shore through the open window. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe fully. The tightness in my chest that had become so familiar I'd stopped noticing it was gone. I thought about the day Doug and I met, at a friend's barbecue during my final year of grad school. He'd been charming, attentive, seemingly fascinated by my passion for literature and my dreams of becoming a rare books curator. We married 6 months later, just after my graduation. I was 24, brimming with ambition and idealism. The shifts in our relationship had been so gradual that I barely noticed them happening. First, it was reasonable things. Moving to Traverse City for his job because the opportunity was too good to pass up. Then it was putting off my own career search because he was working long hours and needed support at home. Then it was the subtle comments about how my interests were impractical or a waste of time, until eventually I stopped mentioning them at all. I wondered when exactly I had lost myself. Was it when I stopped correcting people who introduced me solely as Doug's wife? Was it when I gave up my weekly writing group because Doug complained about being alone on Thursday nights? Or was it when I started measuring my worth by how well I anticipated his needs? It didn't matter now. What mattered was that I had found myself again, and I wasn't going to lose sight of who I was ever again. The job interview at the Petoskey Public Library went well. The director, a woman named Eleanor who had to be in her 70s, looked over my resume with interest. "It says here you graduated top of your class at University of Michigan," she noted, glancing up at me. "That was almost 20 years ago. What have you been doing since then?" I took a deep breath. I got married right after graduation. My husband's career took priority, and I lost sight of my own goals. Eleanor nodded, no judgment in her eyes. "Life happens, but you're here now." "I am," I agreed, "and I'm ready to start over." She hired me on the spot, part-time to start, with the possibility of full-time once I got settled. The salary was modest, nothing like what Doug and I had lived on, but it was mine, earned with my skills, my education, my effort. My first day at the library felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. Eleanor assigned me to the reference desk, where I helped patrons find information, navigate databases, and discover new books. The work engaged my mind in ways I hadn't experienced in years. I found myself researching obscure topics, learning alongside the patrons, feeling the thrill of connecting people with exactly what they needed. "You're a natural," Eleanor told me at the end of my first week. "It's like you've been doing this your whole life." "In a way, I have," I replied. "I just never got paid for it." In the weeks that followed, I filed for divorce, found a small apartment near the library, and began the process of disentangling my life from Doug's. He alternated between pleading and threatening, promising to change, and then warning me of financial ruin. When neither worked, he tried to turn our friends against me, painting himself as the victim of my midlife crisis. Some believed him, others didn't. I found I cared less than I expected about what people thought. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based on what I wanted, not on how others would perceive me. The day I moved into my apartment, a small one-bedroom above a bookstore in downtown Petoskey, was both terrifying and exhilarating. The place was nothing like the spacious condo Doug and I had shared. The floors creaked, the plumbing was temperamental, and the kitchen was barely big enough for a small table. But when I unlocked the door and stepped inside with my few boxes of belongings, I felt a surge of pride so intense it brought tears to my eyes. This place was mine. Every decision about it, from the color of the curtains to where I placed my coffee mug, would be mine alone. No one would criticize my choices or make me feel like my preferences were an inconvenience. I could leave dishes in the sink if I wanted to. I could stay up late reading without worrying about disturbing anyone. I could play my music, cook what I liked, invite friends over without checking someone else's schedule. I spent that first night sitting by the window that overlooked the main street, watching people stroll past, lights glowing in shop windows. I had a glass of wine and a book, and for the first time in forever, I felt completely at peace with myself. "Thanks, Mom," I managed, placing the cellophane-wrapped basket beside the other presents. A gift card to a steakhouse from Dad. I've been vegetarian for 6 years. A generic live, laugh, love wall hanging from Aunt Carol. I live in a modern minimalist apartment. And a romance novel with a bare-chested cowboy on the cover from Grandma. I exclusively read historical nonfiction and true crime. Mark had gotten me nothing, as usual, but had the audacity to help himself to the cake I'd baked myself. "Is that all of them?" Dad asked, already reaching for the TV remote. "Looks like it," I said, forcing a smile that no one bothered to notice. Dad clicked on the TV, the baseball announcer's voice immediately drowning out any possibility of conversation. Mom returned to scrolling through her phone, occasionally showing Aunt Carol something that made them both chuckle. The divorce proceedings were contentious. Doug fought over every asset, every account, trying to use money to force me back or punish me for leaving. My lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Rita with 20 years of experience handling divorces in northern Michigan, was unimpressed by his tactics. "He's used to getting his way," she observed during one particularly difficult meeting. "Men like him always are, but he's not going to get it this time." She was right. In the end, we reached a settlement that gave me enough to start over. Not wealth, but independence. The day the divorce was finalized, I took myself out to dinner at a small bistro overlooking the bay. I ordered champagne and raised a glass to myself. "To Melissa Parker," I said quietly. "Nice to finally meet you." As spring turned to summer, my life developed a rhythm of its own. Mornings at the library, afternoons exploring my new town, or working on short stories, a passion I'd abandoned years ago. Weekends, hiking the trails around Petoskey, or visiting nearby towns I'd never taken the time to appreciate when living in the area with Doug. I made new friends, real ones, not the couples Doug and I had socialized with, who were really his friends or business connections. There was Eleanor, of course, who became a mentor as well as a boss. There was Tara, another divorcee who owned the bookstore below my apartment and invited me to her book club. There was Marcus, a retired English professor who came to the library every Tuesday to research local history and always brought me coffee. And then there was Evan, a landscape architect who came into the library looking for books on native Michigan plants. He was quiet, thoughtful, with kind eyes and a slow smile that made me feel seen in a way Doug's flashy charm never had. "I'm restoring a prairie on a property up near Harbor Springs," he explained during one of his visits. "The owner wants to bring back the native ecosystem." We talked about environmental restoration, about the importance of native species, about the slow, patient work of healing damaged landscapes. Something in his words resonated with me. The idea that restoration wasn't about imposing an artificial perfection, but about creating the conditions for natural healing to occur. "It must be satisfying," I said, "to help bring something back to what it's meant to be." He looked at me with those thoughtful eyes. "It is, but you have to be patient. You can't rush healing." Evan asked me out for coffee after his third visit to the library. We took our drinks to the waterfront and sat watching the boats in the harbor. He didn't dominate the conversation the way Doug always had. He asked questions and actually listened to my answers. When I mentioned my writing, He didn't dismiss it as a hobby, but asked what I was working on and whether he could read something sometime. "I'd like that," I said, surprised to find that I meant it. We dated slowly, carefully. Both of us had scars. He was a widower, his wife lost to cancer 5 years earlier, and neither of us wanted to rush into something we weren't ready for. But there was a gentleness to our connection that felt healing in itself. 6 months after leaving Doug, I was working full-time at the library, living in my own apartment, and slowly rediscovering the woman I'd been before I became Mrs. Douglas Parker. I had submitted one of my short stories to a literary magazine and, to my shock, received an acceptance letter and a small payment. The story, about a woman who finds an old letter in a used book that changes her life, would be published in the fall issue. I ran into Doug once, unexpectedly. I was in Traverse City for a library conference, having lunch alone at a cafe downtown, when he walked in with a woman. She was younger, blonde, laughing at something he said. I recognized her from the photos, Cynthia. He saw me before I could decide whether to acknowledge him or not. He froze for a moment, then said something to Cynthia and walked over to my table. "Melissa," he said, his voice carrying that familiar note of controlled charm. "You look different." I smiled. "Hello, Doug." He looked at me more closely, and I could see him trying to reconcile the woman before him with the wife he had known. My hair was shorter now, cut into a style that suited me, rather than one Doug preferred. I was wearing a bright blue dress, a color he had always said was too loud for me. Most importantly, I was sitting straighter, meeting his gaze directly, not instinctively making myself smaller in his presence. "I heard you're working at the library now," he continued, glancing around as if checking whether anyone was watching our interaction. "How's that going for you?" "I love it," I said simply. He nodded, shifting his weight. "Good, I'm glad you're okay." I looked past him to where Cynthia waited, scrolling through her phone. "She's pretty," I observed. "Does she know about the others?" His face hardened. "There are no others. I've changed, Melissa. Cynthia and I, we have something real." "I hope that's true," I said, meaning it. "Everyone deserves something real." He hesitated, then leaned closer. "You know, I still think you made a mistake. Walking away from everything we had, you could have had it all." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized with a start that I felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, no regret. Just the mild curiosity you might feel when encountering a photograph of a place you once visited but can barely remember. "I do have it all, Doug," I said, gathering my things and standing up. "Just not your version of all. Enjoy your lunch." I walked past Cynthia on my way out, our eyes meeting briefly. I saw in her face a reflection of my younger self, hopeful, eager to please, certain that she was different from the others. I almost wanted to warn her, to tell her to pay attention to the red flags I had ignored. But it wasn't my place. She would have to make her own journey, just as I had made mine. Outside, the spring air was crisp and clean. I breathed it in deeply, feeling the sun on my face. In my pocket, my phone buzzed with a text from Evan. We'd been seeing each other for nearly 4 months now, taking things slowly, getting to know each other at a pace that felt right. "Still on for dinner tonight?" his message read. I smiled as I typed back, looking forward to it. That evening, Evan cooked dinner at his cabin just outside of town. Unlike the sleek, modern condo Doug had insisted on, Evan's place was warm and lived in, with bookshelves lining the walls and large windows overlooking the woods behind the property. "I have something for you," he said after dinner, handing me a small, wrapped package. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal, the cover embossed with a simple tree design. "I noticed your old one is nearly full," he said. "I thought you might need a new one for all those stories you're working on."